Hello, my name is Ann Carlson, and today I'd like to talk to you about planning considerations for maintaining and modernizing your Oracle e-Business Suite, basically sharing with you some best practices for getting current and staying up to date with your e-Business Suite. So basically, this is targeted to those of you who are running e-Business Suite 12.2 and are planning to continue running 12.2 for several more years. Then you'll want to be aware of some maintenance and modernization projects that you should have on your roadmap. Now, some of the projects are required for supportability reasons, while others are optional and yet value added. And while you may have already completed some of these 12.2 maintenance and modernization projects, certain of the projects are tied to future milestones. So what we'll do is examine some of the key maintenance and modernization projects. We'll talk about the timelines and the best practices for accomplishing those projects. And in general, we'll talk about how you gain more value from your e-Business Suite investment. We'll start by doing a very quick review of the overall e-Business Suite strategy, and then we'll dive into the core of the presentation, sharing the best practices for maintaining and modernizing. We'll wrap up with some quick takeaways and additional resources. So the overall strategy, as you probably have heard, is what we call continuous innovation, which is basically the term that we apply to your ability to continue advancing applications and technology separately from one another without ever having to do another major upgrade. So practically speaking, what this boils down to is that since the beginning of the 12.2 cycle, we've made available to our customers on an approximately annual basis EBS cross-suite release update packs that combine new features with bug fixes and performance enhancements all into a consolidated release deliverable. And as you can see, we've done this about once a year. The last one of these came out in the fall of 2024, and that was called 12.2.14. Alongside of these cross e-Business Suite release update packs, we've also been making twice annual EBS Enterprise Command Center releases. And those are delivered separately, mainly because they're cycling a little bit faster. Now, what's enabled us to commit to this continuous innovation and this ongoing release of cross-suite release update packs is that we figured out a way to move from our prior release update strategy, wherein in order in the past to get to a later version of the middleware, that is the underlying technology for e-Business Suite, you had to do that at the same time that you took a brand new e-Business Suite code line. And that's what you did, for example, when you moved up from EBS 12.1.3 to 12.2.13, you did that using a so-called major e-Business Suite upgrade. Going forward, you'll be able to update your Fusion middleware, that is, do a tech stack update, a tech stack only update, while staying on the same e-Business Suite code line. So you could choose to refresh your middleware to be the future versions of it, that is, get to new forms level, reports, Java, and so forth, but not have to change your e-Business Suite code level. You're still on 12.2.13. And then correspondingly, you could continue to advance your e-Business Suite code level, let's say from 12.2.13 to 12.2.14, without having to make a change to your underlying middleware. That's really the essence of continuous innovation. Now, this change in release strategy engendered a change in our support policy where we moved to something that we call long-term premier support that's beyond, any customer's planning horizon. And specifically what we mean is that while we've established an end date for premier support, currently it's at 2036, we've also been following a pattern of moving that end date out an additional year as each year passes. Hence, we call this the rolling 10 plus years of premier support. And the idea behind this is simply that, once you're on 12.2, you need not be fretting about or worrying about premier support coming to an end at any time soon. You can be assured that you will have at least 10 plus years of premier support until such a time as we would say otherwise. All right, so that sums up the overall sort of continuous innovation, long-term support strategy. Now let's start diving into the key maintenance and modernization projects for 12.2. We're going to look first at the projects that are required for supportability. Those are on the top here. And then we'll move on into talking about the optional but value-added projects. So first, let's look at what you need to do to keep your EBS 12.2 in good health. And we'll start by looking at some ongoing maintenance best practices for 12.2. In order to get going on that, I'd just like to set the table by explaining or reminding you that when you first installed or upgraded to EBS 12.2, the first step was to, on top of 12.2.0, the base release, was to apply a suite-wide eBusiness Suite RUP to update all of the EBS product families to what was then the current EBS release level. So for example, let's say you did your initial install or your upgrade in mid-2020 when 12.2.9 was the current release level, then most likely you apply the EBS 12.2.9 RUP, which brought all of the product families, those that you are actively using and even those that you're not using, to the 12.2.9 release level. So I've got a little diagram down below that illustrates this, and it's worth looking at it because I'm going to use that same diagram throughout the presentation. What I've done there is model the product families that you are using with white background. So that's financials, procurement, supply chain, and HR. And then I'm highlighting with the grid that, you're not running any products that are part of either projects or CRM. Now, suppose in this scenario that you want to get up to date with the now current EBS release level, then what we would recommend is that you go ahead and apply the now current eBusiness Suite RUP, which is 12.2.14, to bring all of your product families, including those that you're not even using, up to the current release level. So that's what we're showing here. Everything, products you're using, products you're not using, are now at the 12.2.14 level. So we'd like to recommend that as a maintenance best practice that you plan to apply the current EBS RUP on a regular basis. And by that, I mean that you not have as a plan to sort of just stay behind or hang out on an older RUP level for many years at a time, but that instead you establish some sort of periodicity by which your organization applies the current eBusiness Suite RUP, whether that's every 2 years, every 3 years, every 4 years, whatever works for you. But the main point here is that you avoid staying on an older EBS 12.2x RUP level for many years at a time. Now, there are many benefits of staying current, the most obvious of which is that by getting current, you'll pick up the latest error corrections, i.e. bug fixes, the latest performance enhancements, and of course, the latest functionality enhancements. And the big advantage to taking the RUP from us, instead of, applying a bunch of patches yourself, is that you'll have a consolidated and tested RUP. All these changes, in other words, will have been consolidated and carefully tested by EBS development. It's important to point out that the error corrections and enhancements that we include in these release update packs are not invasive or destabilizing. And in fact, when it comes to the functionality enhancements, for the most part, you choose when to uptake them. They are not just sort of silently laid down. There are certainly some that are, that are not destabilizing that may, be turned on without you taking an action. But for the most part, you actually have to actively switch on the enhancements. Now, by staying current, another advantage to you is that you're reducing your risk of having to do one-off patching to address any problems that might crop up in production at what is invariably an inconvenient time for known issues that were fixed in a later EBS 12.2x RUP. So you're running 12.2.5 and then you encounter a problem that was fixed later. Then, that's a worse situation for you. But then when you go, and furthermore, that when you do need to take a one-off patch to fix a known issue, you can simplify the one-off patching process by staying closer to the latest EBS release level, what we call the tip level. So I've tried to demonstrate this here with this diagram showing that, let's say, for example, if you are running 12.2.13, which is a relatively current release, and you encounter a bug and you need a one-off patch, it's possible that the patch that we could deliver you would have, one file with one line of code changed. However, if you encounter that same problem at, say, the 12.2.5 level, very likely you'll be taking a much bigger patch that takes in a lot of changes that have occurred since 12.2.5, such that the patch that you're getting contains many more delivered files, more code objects will have been touched. There may be more product interdependencies. There may even be some manual steps, and sometimes those are part of the patching process. And almost definitely you'll need to do more testing just because of this greater patching complexity. And we know that people don't particularly enjoy doing maintenance projects. However, I want to make the point that application of the current eBusiness Suite RUP is a much smaller project with fewer system impacts than the major upgrades that you may have already undergone. And I've got this kind of chart here to make the comparisons point by point. So for example, with the upgrade from 11i to 12.1 or 12.1 to 12.2, as compared to the EBS current RUP application, you do still, in all of those cases, need to do full functional and load testing just to ensure that, your EBS is operating as you expect. However, when you do apply the EBS RUP, you're not replacing all of your EBS code. You're just replacing whatever has changed in that RUP. You're not touching your middleware at all. That's not fully replaced. And your cutover time to apply the EBS RUP is nothing like with the major upgrades. In fact, you're using online patching to apply the EBS RUP, something that you couldn't do until you had completed the upgrade to 12.2. And then probably most importantly, we are not at this point in these, annual RUPs making any of these types of invasive architectural changes that you had experienced in prior major upgrades. So for example, you wouldn't undergo anything like the financials architecture changes and all the many, data changes and customization impacts that engendered, nor would you undertake the type of architectural change that you had when going from 12.1 to 12.2 when you uptook online patching. So again, applying the current RUP is a smaller project with fewer system impacts than doing the major upgrades. Now, when you go to apply an EBS suite-wide RUP, we would advise you to always target the latest available, or what I've been calling the current RUP. This is a maintenance best practice, and it maybe is not immediately intuitive because sometimes people feel that by instead applying the N-1 or the N-2 RUP, that it's safer for them because perhaps somebody has preceded them and identified any bugs that have since been fixed. But in fact, it's the case that the later EBS RUPs are actually delivering additional bug fixes that you should welcome, as well as additional feature capabilities that you would then have the option to uptake or not. And in fact, we feel so strongly that going to the latest available EBS RUP is the best practice that we would encourage you, if you're already, so to speak, in progress with a release update pack project, and a new RUP comes out, that you at least consider whether you want to switch to it. Now, obviously, it's going to depend on how far along you are in your project. If you're close to the finish line, you wouldn't switch. But if you're fairly early along, just be aware that even any customization analysis that you've already done with an earlier suite-wide RUP level would continue to be relevant to the later suite-wide RUP. And then further, if you are engaging an implementation partner to apply your suite-wide eBusiness Suite RUP, you'd want to make sure that your contract does not lock you into a specific EBS 12.2x RUP level. The reason being that if your project were to get delayed for some reason, and there's a pause of a year or two, you don't want to be locked into applying a RUP level that's at the N-2 or N-3 RUP level. The other thing to be aware of is that if you have relatively recently applied the SuiteWide RUP, and yet you now see that there's something that has recently come out in a product family that's captured your interest. Let's say there's some new features that have come out in the latest release of procurement. You have the option to apply the procurement family pack without, just that alone, without doing the SuiteWide RUP. So let me show you what that means. It means that you're going from procurement 12.2.12 in this case up to procurement 12.2.14, and that can coexist alongside of the other product families at the 12.2.12 level. In other words, the only change you're making is to the procurement product families. The other families stay at the level that they happen at. So to kind of net this out, the family pack updates within EBS 12.2 are not major upgrades. You can have family packs at different 12.2x release levels coexist in a single eBusiness Suite instance, and you have the freedom to update with a family pack whenever you see some new values, some new functionality that you'd like to take advantage of in a particular product area. Okay, moving along, let's look at some special considerations for EBS 12.2.3 to 12.2.6. Now here, what I'd like to talk about was the relatively recently changed error correction baseline for EBS 12.2. Turns out in late 2022, we announced that we were going to move up the error correction baseline from where it had been for quite a while back at 12.2.3 up to 12.2.7, which is the level at which and above, that most customers are either running 12.2.7 or above. So we did make the decision to kind of officially move our baseline there. And we described that or announced that in an EBS Tech Blog article. I have the link for that down below. And if you download the PDF for this presentation, you can go directly to that blog article that kind of laid out the rationale for moving the error correction baseline. And I'll try to cover that off as well in the next few slides. So first off, to kind of give a little better definition on what is the baseline policy, it's basically the release level at which Oracle builds and tests patches against. So we're going to build any new eBusiness Suite patches, assuming that customers are running 12.2.7 or higher. It's also the release level around which we do any technology modernization or any new technology certifications. And this would include any future database certifications, as well as the upcoming technology update for Fusion middleware. I want to really emphasize that customers running EBS below the error correction baseline are still fully supported. You still in full Premier support, which applies to the EBS 12.2 release overall. It's only that if you're running EBS 12.2.3 to 12.2.6, that is, you're below the error correction baseline, you might have a more complex interaction with Oracle support when you need to receive a fix. I also would rush to emphasize, however, that if you, regardless of whether you're below the error correction baseline or not, you will continue to receive security CPUs that are tested for EBS 12.2.3 or higher. Now, hearkening back on the diagram I showed earlier describing, one-off patching, I just would like to highlight here that you can simplify, as we noted before, simplify your one-off patching by staying close to the latest 12.2x code level. And in fact, we can simplify the one-off patches that we issue by, on the assumption now that everybody's running at 12.2.7 or above. So that's sort of part of our motivation and should be part of the customer's motivation as well, because it means that everybody's benefiting from simpler, smaller one-off patches as of July 1st, 2024. All right, let's dig in a little. What if you happen to still be running below 12.2.7, and by that I mean between 12.2.3 and 12.2.6, after July 1st, 2024, which is where we're certainly at today. So let's just walk through the scenarios. If you encounter an issue that has an available patch and you find that patch on My Oracle Support, you're going to need to contact support to determine if that patch was created before or after July 1st, 2024. if the patch was created before July 1st, 2024, then you'll know that it was tested for 12.2.3 to 12.2.6 so that you can apply it. However, if it was created after July 1st, 2024, you'll know that it wasn't tested for 12.2.3 to 12.2.6. And then what you'll need to do in that case is to consult with EBS development to determine, well, actually, you'll not be doing this. Support will be consulting with EBS development to determine if it's compatible with your EBS environment. The result may be that, development might need to create a version of the available patch that's compatible with your down-revved instance, or development might ask that you apply additional patches before you uptake the available patch. Now, the likelihood that an available patch that you find on MOS was created after July 1st, 2024 will be low immediately after that baseline change. That is, around the time of that change and the months after, the likelihood that you're going to come across patches that you can't apply will be fairly small, but is of course increasing over time. So while the impact of running below the error correction baseline for a few months should be minor, it's not a good idea to plan to hang out below the baseline for many months, or certainly even for years. You don't want to be hanging out below the baseline. So if you're running any products at the 12.2.3 to 12.2.6 release level, we would advise you to get those above the error correction baseline. And the easiest or most direct way to do that is by applying the current suite-wide EBS RUP as soon as is practical. So that would be at the current time to get to 12.2.14. Now, we get a lot of questions about so-called future updates to the error correction baseline, where people are concerned that, having made this change in July of 2024, what's the plan going forward? Might we consider moving it up like every year, another year, that type of thing? Rest assured that before we moved the error correction baseline from 12.2.3 to 12.2.7, we did heavily consult with the OATUG Customer Support Council, as well as with some individual customers. And what we found was that the customer community in general did understand the benefit of moving the baseline, but we were asked to move the baseline relatively infrequently, and that when we do move it, to move several release levels at once versus moving up in small increments, as in like one release level each year. And as well, customers expressed that they would like us to give substantial advance notice, kind of like what we had done for this most recent change. There was some notice of something like, 18, 19 months, something like that. So regarding any future error correction baseline updates, first off, we don't anticipate moving the baseline for at least a few more years, and in fact, we have no specific date in mind. We wouldn't consider moving the baseline one release level each year, and we would again consult with the customer community, just as we did this previous time, before making any error correction baseline change. All right, now let's turn our attention to how you stay current with your database version. And here, I'd like to start off by just reminding everyone that Oracle Database 19c has kind of been the reigning level against which people were running. EBS customers have been running for quite a while now, both on 12.2 and 12.1. And in so doing, getting there, you were able to use the information center on My Oracle Support that I'm showing you here. Now, you've probably heard that the next long-term support release against which we're certifying is Oracle Database 23 AI. And in fact, we have actually certified EBS with 23 AI for certain releases. So for example, where the database team has released 23 AI, we have certified against already. So that would include the on-premises Exadata database machine, as well as we've certified with commercial cloud on the following database cloud services. That is Oracle Base Database Service, Oracle Exadata Database Service on dedicated infrastructure, and Oracle Exadata Database Service on Cloudit customer. We're still awaiting the availability of other on-premises platforms, but once those do become available, I would expect that the certifications would come along fairly quickly. If you want to stay current with the status of the database releases, then I recommend that you stay current with the note that I've highlighted at the bottom, the release schedule of current database releases, Doc 742060.1. Something I'd like to highlight is we know that there are customers that are still running on relatively old database releases, such as 11.204 and 12.102. If you are one of those customers, just be aware of that you're well out of the extended support period. You're now in sustaining support. And in fact, what you're having to rely on most likely is a paid upgrade support restricted / custom that's provided by customer success services team within Oracle. And the end date for that is currently published is December 31st, 2025. I just want to make you aware of the fact that even if the customer success services team were to decide to extend past 2025, EBS won't be able to provide error correction support for EBS 12.2 customers running below 19C after the end of 2025. We've already announced that end of error correction support after after December 31st, 2025 in an alert. I've highlighted that in blue on the screen here. So if you're in this situation of still running those older releases, it's a very high priority for you to upgrade to database 19C. Once you get there, you can enjoy a relatively long premier support and extended support period. And just be aware that since you cannot upgrade directly from a pre-19C database to 23AI, that is, you couldn't upgrade directly from 11G or 12C to database 23AI. If you're running on those older releases, you'll want to prioritize your upgrade to database 19C. Here I've just noted a few planning considerations, things you can do today before you upgrade to 23AI to get ready for that. The first on the left there, the obvious one, get to database 19C if you're still at 11.204 or 12.102. Other things that you'll need to do and can do now is to modernize your database architecture, doing things like adopting the EBS system schema, which is going to remove some dependencies on database features that are desupported with database 23AI. You'd want to adopt unified auditing, the most recent version of the auditing capabilities. Traditional auditing is desupported with database 23AI. And you'd want to convert to case and sensitive PDB names. I have the Moss notes that describe each of these changes noted here. And then finally, of course, you'll want to comply with the error correction baseline because for eBusiness Suite, because that's going to be a requirement for the upgrade to 23AI. You can visit this 23AI Information Center at any time to get more details on everything that I've just laid out. And of course, this is the Moss Center that you're going to want to consult as you plan your upgrade to database 23AI. All right, now let's turn our attention to the upcoming application tech stack update. So just a reminder again, this is the ability to modernize your Fusion middleware while keeping the same EBS code level. It's in our roadmap. We haven't released it yet. However, we are far enough along with our development and testing that we can describe it in fairly good detail to you. The experience of taking the application tech stack update will be quite similar to the experience of doing an EBS platform migration. For example, you may have experienced this, if you move from, say, the AIX operating system to Linux. What you're going to do is upload a manifest that describes your specific EBS code level to Oracle. You'll upload that to the Oracle support organization, and then they in turn will return to you a patch built with the new technology stack that matches your exact EBS code level. They'll also provide for you the technology or a tool that allows you to lay down the new technology stack with the changes being applied during an online patching cycle with minimal downtime. Just a reminder that the application technology stack update will be available only for EBS 12.2.7 or higher. And by that, I mean EBS 12.2.7 RUP level, because, the EBS files below the 12.2.7 level will not be built on the new technology stack. All of the EBS products in your system, even those that you're not running, must be at the EBS 12.2.7 RUP level or higher before you apply the application technology stack update. And there will be some additional prerequisites, such as, applying later ADTXK and application technology group family packs, as well as, of course, upgrading to Oracle Database 23 AI. Now, in terms of our rollout of the application technology stack update, well, we don't have a fixed date in mind on which this is going to come out. As it does come out, it's going to be coming out in sort of a progressive rollout manner. That is, we anticipate making it available to customers first who are running EBS in hosted environments, the more sort of closely controlled environments, if you will, such as the Oracle Managed Cloud Services. And from there, we would ramp up to the next level of controlled environment. That would be OCI environments. And then finally, we would roll out the tech stack update for on-premises environments. So that is, we're going to do a very careful rollout to ensure that the application technology stack update works perfectly for all customers. Now, how are you going to accomplish these key EBS modernization projects? How are you going to get current with the latest EBS database and middleware releases? Well, first off, a reminder again of what you're going to need to do is to apply the EBS RUP if you're below the current RUP level, or below, and in particular, if you're below 12.2.7 baseline level. You're going to need to do the tech stack update, and you're going to need to do the database upgrade to Database 23 AI. I've got a little asterisk here showing that, of course, if you're below 19C, that would be your first priority project to get to 19C. Because there are technology dependencies between these layers, you must sequence the projects as follows. If you're running any projects below EBS 12.2.7, you're below the error compliance baseline, so you'll need to apply that EBS RUP first. After that, the next step would be to do the database upgrade, because you'll need to get to, if you're on a database version below 23 AI, you need to do that before you can do the technology stack update. So that would be the third in the sequence here. In terms of how to group these modernization projects, that's really up to you. Some customers will want to do each update in a separate project in downtime. Some might prefer to combine, two of the updates into a single project in downtime. And of course, you can always choose to combine them all into a single project in downtime, all three updates, concentrating changes at all levels of your eBusiness Suite system into a single project with a single downtime and testing cycle. So I'm getting close to the end of this, how to keep your EBS database and middleware releases up to date section. And what I'd like to do here is just net out for you the key projects required for supportability. So I've kind of bucketed the projects in terms of red, highest priority, yellow, things you need to be concerned about next, and then finally green, roadmap items that you would need to be concerned with in the next few years. So first off, if you're running below EBS 12.2, like you're running 12.1 or below even, that is by far your highest priority project. You do need to get to EBS 12.2 before any of this discussion becomes relevant. I've not covered off the, upgrade to 12.2 because it's covered off in many other places. I've got a link below to the 12.2 upgrade resource guide should you need to, drill the detail on that. Beyond being on 12.2, you obviously need to be at the current database level. So if you're running below database 19C, it's a high priority to get to 19C. Moving to the next, urgency level, if you will. If you're running below EBS 12.2.7, you want to plan to get to the current eBusiness Suite release. And then farther out into the next few years, you'll want to plan to get to database 23AI after it's certified for your platform. And of course, apply the application tech stack update when it's available. Wow, okay, so now we've covered off of the projects required for supportability, and that frees us up to talk about the optional but value-added projects. The first area I'd like to address is how you might leverage some additional technologies. First, we'll look at how you would move your EBS to the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. There are many reasons for doing that. Most customers, know already what the benefits are, and here I'm just showing them again for completeness. One thing I would like you to be aware of is that we do offer assistance in moving your eBusiness Suite onto the cloud infrastructure and in maintaining it once it's there using our Oracle Cloud Manager capabilities, which allow you to, for example, do provisioning of new instances. And that would include very simple instances that you can, set up with preset topologies with a single click, as well as some more advanced topologies, including those that involve database cloud service or Exadata cloud service or autonomous database. You also have the option to use the Cloud Manager utilities that we offer to do what we call lift and shift. That is to bring your existing on-premises EBS environment to the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, carrying over all of your existing EBS configurations, your existing historical data, and your existing customizations. And then once you're up and running on OCI, you can, of course, use our lifecycle management utilities that automate the common lifecycle management activities, such as fast clone, backup and restore, that help you achieve environment elasticity, doing things such as deleting and adding nodes, and finally doing things like disaster recovery configuration. Here I'm just showing you kind of what the Cloud Manager interface looks like. You can get the idea here. Hopefully we just have these easy to use screens, many things you could be accomplished with a single click. Now, the point I would really like to highlight here is that you can move your EBS to OCI in months versus, say, years. In other words, it's a fairly straightforward project. It's been accomplished by many other EBS customers, and I've got some scenarios here that you can look at on your own time to get a feel for the kind of time frames and the kind of complexity, or when I say complexity, I mean the kind of deployments that people were able to move to OCI in periods of time shorter than a year, sometimes as short as 3 months or 4 months, things like that. The other thing I'd like to highlight is that you can migrate your EBS to the cloud infrastructure at any time alongside of the other projects we've been talking about. So you can migrate any EBS 12.2x release level to OCI. You can migrate your EBS to OCI whether you're running on database 19C or database 23AI. You can perform the future EBS application technology stack update either on premises or on OCI. And again, just to underscore, you can do all of this in months rather than years. Let's look at another technology integration that we've added relatively recently at the urging of customers, actually. So for a while now, we've made available this white paper extending Oracle eBusiness Suite Release 12.2 using Oracle Apex that describes how to launch an external Apex application for EBS. That is, to launch customizations that you may have built using Apex from EBS. Now, what we've done beginning from 12.2.14, and this at customers' requests, has been to provide a tighter integration, a more enhanced Apex integration for EBS customizations. So for example, starting with 12.2.14, you can register your custom Apex pages as EBS functions, and you can deploy them such that your customers or your users can navigate seamlessly from the standard EBS UI to your Apex pages. And the EBS configured authentication is uptaken by those Apex pages. Access is controlled via the usual EBS function security authorization. And finally, you can integrate your Apex workspace schemas with eBusiness Suite. Those will be registered as custom eBusiness Suite schemas such that, they are additions enabled and can be subject to online patching. So for more information on all of this, you would, again, consult the white paper that I've mentioned on the previous page, which we updated coincident with 12/2/14 as of November 2024. Just to give you a more visceral sense of what your custom Apex screen would look like, you can see here that it's sitting within this Apex container so that it looks, in effect, like an OA framework page, inherits the global menu, the home, all of the accoutrement of an OA framework page you can see across the top. So from your end user's perspective, they're not really seeing a big difference between the Oracle delivered pages and your custom Apex pages. Let's look at another one of the Oracle technologies that we've integrated with, something called Oracle Guided Learning. Now, Oracle Guided Learning is, again, something that customers have asked us to provide the integration for, and we work to deliver that with 12/2/14. And it's basically an automated software tool that guides your users through the processes in your application, providing them things like user guides and smart tips and messages that are delivered via the OGL console and displayed in your environment once published. That is, it allows you to provide your own custom content to your customers. So you can see on this page, if you look over on the far right, that there's the little icon there that indicates that Oracle Guided Learning is enabled for this page. There we go. We're blowing it up a little here. And then as you can see here, I'll just show you so you, again, get a little more visceral sense for how it works. Here you see that the Oracle Guided Learning icon is in the upper right there. You're looking at your work list. And if you need some help, well, you can click on the Guided Learning icon, access the Create iProcurement non-catalog request content, which in turn now is directing you in a somewhat, for those of you familiar with UPK, in a UPK-like fashion to select iProcurement, select a non-catalog request, select an item type, enter quantity, enter unit price. And I should add that, you could customize the text in these pop-ups to be whatever your users would need in order to succeed. And then finally select add to cart and next. Some of the common use cases for Oracle Guided Learning is kind of what I just showed you, the sort of, just-in-time training for new and infrequent users of certain screens, as well as the change communications capability where you can kind of put out these blasts that show up that show your customers things like, hey, we're going to have, a new release update. And finally, you can create sort of these custom business process manuals. So in effect, again, for those of you familiar with UPK and even the Tutor product, this guided learning is, if you will, kind of a mashup of those two products. All righty. So moving into a different area, talking about the uptake of EBS Enterprise Command Centers. I'm sure you've all heard about the Enterprise Command Centers. We first began rolling them out in 2018. These are these business intelligence style dashboards that we now make available for the vast bulk of our key products. And what they allow your user to do is to start their kind of business day or their eBusiness Suite day by seeing these visually attractive screens that kind of invite them to start exploring what's going on currently with their transactional system. They can then browse and drill on actionable indicators, use the consumer-like search and filters, see that the data is recalculated with any drill that they do. In effect, have what we call a conversation with their data to narrow in on the transactions that they should take action on. Now, as I mentioned, we've been building these out since 2018, and as of September of 2024, we have coverage of 36 product areas that's comprised of 145, or in fact, more than 145 role-specific dashboards across the suite, and you can see the list of those here. Now, what I'd like to do is kind of emphasize that this is something that we've invested heavily in and we're continuing to invest heavily in. So you'd really want to get the benefit of that investment. And I would just like to dispel any concern that you might have that ECC is just yet another reporting tool. Like perhaps you already have other reporting tools or even a data warehouse and feel that you might not benefit from using ECC. But I just want to highlight that ECC is different in that it focuses on reporting against your EBS transactional data. You can access data about your in-process transactions, and you can control the frequency of the data that ECC is looking at. That is, you can control the frequency of the data collection to ensure the currency that you need. The other thing to note is that ECC ensures that your users have the same security context when they're looking at an ECC dashboard as they do when they're looking at their EBS transactional screens. The exact same data security rules apply to the ECC data. So the data that the user sees is absolutely consistent with their EBS role. It's really just a means of, if you will, turbocharging your EBS by taking advantage of pre-built, out-of-the-box dashboards and the ETL scripts that we provide, which you can, of course, modify with our developer tool, that is the ECC framework. And then finally, I'll say you don't need to be running one of the latest EBS 12.2x. Like you don't need to be on 12.2.14 in order to uptake the latest ECC update. You might be wondering how to get started with ECC. And what we would recommend is that you undertake an ECC proof of concept or a demo, direct that towards a functional area that's very fundamental to your business, where your users are most likely to see high value. So for example, an area where users have indicated that a modern UI would be, or a more modern UI would be welcome, or where there's the thought that an increase in productivity is needed, or just where you're seeing heavy demand for custom operational reports. What we're finding is that once users get familiar with one or two of the enterprise command centers, they tend to want more. So as a best practice to enable the scale up of your ECC deployment, we would recommend that you install ECC on a separate middle tier server. That is, it's technically possible to deploy ECC on the same middle tier server as your EBS middle tier, but in order to prepare for what is likely to be a scale up, you might just start by installing it on its own ECC middle tier server. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of information resources available to you that lays out every aspect of the enterprise command centers in what we call the Enterprise Command Center's Quick Start Guide, which we make available and keep, really scrupulously up to date at oracle.com/EBS-ECC. Now let's turn our attention to implementing EBS functional enhancements. As you might be aware, we put a really high value on building out enhancements that are considered high value by our many customers. That is, at this point, we really want to build what many customers are interested in. And the way that we get this information, well, primarily is actually from our EBS Ideas portal. That's on MyOracle support in the EBS Suite Ideas Lab. I have a I said My Oracle Support, I really mean community.oracle.com. I've got the URL below to the Ideas Lab, and that's where you can enter your favorite enhancement requests, as well as vote on the enhancement requests that have been proposed by other customers. And we look really closely at those, and those highly requested features tend to get into our product roadmaps. We also are looking at EBS enhancements that maybe have been suggested by service requests. And as well, we put a big emphasis on just the informal customer interactions that we have at conferences and other meetings. So by following this path to deciding on enhancements, we've actually been pretty efficient in building out a lot of new enhancements by product family since the start of 12.2. And to kind of, give you a little proof of that, I'm just showing you what we call the eye chart of the major new features that we've added since the start of 12.2 through to 12.2.14. However, for those of you who would like to quickly come up to speed on all of the enhancements that we've delivered, or the major new enhancements that we've delivered since the start of 12.2, I would highly recommend that you see either live at a conference or consume the recorded version of this presentation called Oracle E-Business Suite, What's New in 12.2 Beyond Online Patching, which is going to highlight the modern UX and functional enhancements that have been added since the start of 12.2. Now, in this presentation, my colleague Jeannie Lowell will be covering off things like this evolutionary build out, really since the start of 12.2, of enhanced ordering and billing for a combination of products, subscriptions, and services. There's been a lot of work done here, as you can see, in an evolutionary fashion to provide support for subscription ordering, as well as new billing models such as recurring billing, milestone billing, and usage-based billing. And this rich functionality that we have delivered with the apps is something that would be very difficult for customers to reproduce with custom code. In addition to these sort of major evolutionary sets of new functionality, we've also honed in on some specific areas that customers have asked for. So here in the last several releases since 12.2.11, we focused quite heavily on a set of functionality that users have asked for around fleshing out support for returning or canceling internal sales orders and internal org transfers, basically providing the same level of support for internal sales orders as we currently apply for external sales orders. So you can see here the sort of details around that new set of functionality. Another thing that Jeannie covers off in her overall deck are the many HTML UIs that we have been providing since 12.2.14 as alternatives to the existing forms interfaces. So we still have forms interfaces, but where we see a high need, we do provide the alternative to uptake the more flexible HTML UIs. You're not required to uptake them, but some customers really prefer them. And you can see the list of what we've delivered so far, and this list is growing. You can see there with the red markup that, just since 12.2.13 and 12.2.14, there have been additional HTML UIs delivered. Now, to kind of wrap up this section, I just want to remind you is that if you look at, which of these functional enhancements would you like to uptake, you might want to, for example, support new and improved business processes. And quite commonly, people like to replace their customizations with standard functionality. As you look at analyzing your customizations for possible replacement, I would advise you to consider your overall approach. So there are two main approaches. There's one that we call bottom up for those customers who feel strongly that they want to keep all of their existing customizations. There you would probably, with the help of a systems integrator or Oracle's customer success services team, do a sort of a map and gap. Here's what customization you have today. What can I find in Oracle E-Business Suite today that could replace that? So that's certainly one viable approach. But another approach that you might consider is what we call top-down, where you kind of say, look, if other businesses can run successfully on the native eBusiness Suite, maybe we can too. And what you do with this approach is evaluate the EBS functionality delivered since your last install upgrade and decide if you basically could succeed with the native features. A lot of times customers find that they've been dragging around customizations release over release that they're no longer even using, especially if your pattern has been to do minimal technical upgrades since the time that you first implemented eBusiness Suite. And by, replacing your customizations with the native EBS features, you're reducing your maintenance expenses and setting yourself up for a future move to the SaaS applications, which would, of course, require you to reduce your customizations. So just something to consider. Now, practically speaking, how are you going to identify and make the business case for adopting latest eBusiness Suite features? Here, what I'm going to do is highlight some of the information resources you could consult. So first off, we do come out with each of the EBS 12.2x releases, and as well, actually, with each of the ECC releases, with a kind of a formal written release announcement, as well as a highlights video. So the highlights videos are always linked from these release announcements, and I really encourage you to look at them because they are very carefully put together and then are delivered by our general manager, Cliff Godwin. And in those highlights videos, he's walking through demonstrations of the new features. So here I've, sort of for your convenience, noted the deep links to each of these announcements, and it's from those announcements that you can get to the videos. As well, we have, of course, our traditional release content documents, which are, if you will, release content reference guides. They're about, they can be as long as 100 pages or so for each of the individual product families. We have a total of 16 of these RCDs. Here we're looking at the order management and contracts RCD. And I guess you can get the idea here that, you could draw your finger down the table of contents and, maybe from the names of the features, see things that interest you, then drill in and read a little bit about those new features. Just to make it easier for you to go directly to the product family RCD that you're interested in, I've got some deep links here that will go directly to each one of those. And again, if you download this deck, this PDF, you could take advantage of those deep links. Another resource that we provide that provides sort of the delta information from 12.2x to 12.2y release are the so-called EBS Transfer of Information training. This is free online training, pre-recorded, on how to implement and use the new 12.2 features. These are delivered by the very people who have designed and developed the features, the product managers, etc. And what they're going to do is explain to you the business value and then walk you through the user flows as well as the setup flows. And the nice thing about these are kind of, delivered by the people who actually know these products and features the best, that is the EBS product managers and developers. So you can get to all of the TOIs. I published an index document at oracle.com/go/EBS-TOI. And if you look at that, you'll find the direct links to each of the 12.2 TOIs. And finally, to wrap up this area on available resources, now you found your way to this video presentation, but there are, of course, many others describing the other product areas or the other applications technology areas. And so what I've done here is given, again, the direct links to each of the channels that will take you to these what we call the direct from development videos. Alrighty, so for the takeaways and additional resources, you can see here that we've marched through the entire list of the projects required for supportability as well as the value-added projects. And I would just like to encourage you to consider that, the key thing here is to stay up to date with latest eBusiness Suite database, and middleware releases. And with that in hand, you're in probably a better position to take on some of these other kind of value-added activities. Or you could even consider combining the maintenance and modernization of your releases with the uptakes of some of these value-added projects. Finally, just a quick reminder that things like new certifications, new technology are communicated in the Oracle eBusiness Suite technology blog. And then just to find EBS news and information generally, we keep our homepage up to date. That's at http://oracle.com/EBS. So thanks very much for listening, and I hope this has been of value to you. Have a great day. Thanks.